we have become so conditioned to seek comfort. And comfort is so easy for us now it doesn't matter if it's metabolic comfort, if it's fitness comfort, or if it's, relationship comfort. It's like we've lost our ability to endure like something difficult. And when you go through these, what I want people to hear is that, if you actually lean into this, you become a happier person, a more well-balanced person on the other side. So before you go into it, I just don't want people to lose that, because what you did was very, very brave and very uncharted territory. But if we could all learn to go into these conversations that are filled with some discomfort with a skill set like you're about to teach us, I mean, relationships, our own human evolution could dramatically change. So go ahead.
100%. I mean, you totally nailed it. And, many people associate eustress or adversity mimetics with physiological protocols like fasting or cold water therapy or heat therapy or resistance training. Absolutely 100%. And those were key to my physiological and psychological health, candidly. But where I got interested was, is there an application of adversity mimetics to the psychosocial world?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I started to really lean into these stressful conversations. Because again, if I could have a hard, thorny conversation with someone that I didn't even know, could I not then have it with my aging parents, who are in their mid-80s, or my best friends, or my spouse, or my kids? And again, these are the hard things that we tend to avoid. But, the world that our hearts imagine as possible is right on the other side of having them. So anyways.
And in that, I just want you said something a while back that I think is really important, because a lot of women have this challenge. And then when they go through menopause, as our neurochemical system changes, we start having new behaviors. And the challenge is people pleasing. So what is interesting is you have now, what you're about to share with us, the way I look at this is like cold plunging for people pleasing. Like you're going to put yourself in an environment so that you can overturn the people pleasing, but you're going to need to face the discomfort with a new strategy so the people pleasing stops. And the people pleasing is quite detrimental to a lot of women.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I read Gabor Mate's book like 10 times. And, he, as among many other people, makes a very, very direct connection between people pleasing and autoimmune disease and all sorts of other physiological and psychological conditions. So it's a direct line there. And I mean, part of entering into stressful, difficult, thorny conversations is pre-gaming it with a lot of emotional regulation. And so this is where breath work, or what I sometimes call like jumping into the ice bath of a stressful conversation, but breath work or even ice plunges or meditation, these are all incredibly useful tools for building emotional resilience and emotional regulation. Because if you're going to enter a difficult conversation, you need to be down here, sort of ventrally, vagally activated, if you will, in kind of a vagal theory language. But essentially, you need to be alert enough, kind of through your sympathetic nervous system, but calm and tranquil and relatively serene in your parasympathetic. So you need to find that dynamic homeostasis, that sort of tenuous emotional balance, before you can actually enter into a conversation. And like even physical posture is really important. But if you can maintain an energy that is both alert but tranquil, you create the possibility for coherence and attunement. And so what you're really doing is creating the set and setting of safety and trust such that a productive conversation can even occur. Right?
So you're saying like somebody could apply that with a difficult conversation with an adult child, or with a parent, an aging parent, or a spouse, that is actually really brilliant, because what you're saying is ground yourself with the other techniques, the breath work, the cold plunges, the fasting. I'll tell you a story about that in a moment. That if you can ground yourself in those other hard things, you already have regulated yourself with hard. So going into the relationship hard, you're less triggery. Is that how I'm hearing that?
Totally. Because what happens when you get into a nice plunge, right? You have an involuntary bottom up response, right? Where your heart rate and respiratory rate start to increase. You feel this epinephrine coursing through your veins. It's coming into your neck. You feel like you're going to have a panic attack. And then what? You have a moment where you can apply top-down conscious pressure on top of involuntary bottom-up response such that you can emotionally regulate. And that same exact phenomenon is happening when someone insults you or says an offhanded political comment that you disagree with, or undermines your integrity or your self-worth. You feel that same sensation. It's coming up from under the crust of consciousness. You want to scream and yell out. But then again, if you have been able to cultivate your ability to put top-down pressure on top of that involuntary response, it begins to punctuate all areas of your life, not just in the ice plunge, but when you enter into a difficult conversation with a child or a spouse.
So, okay, with that, I'm going to share with you my
Okay.
my fire story. And there's actually, people can go watch it on YouTube. But the week before the Palisades fires, I had done a 3-day water fast, because I was about to lead 100,000 people through a 3-day water fast. And I wanted to be like, have my own, like I hadn't done one in about 6 months. I wanted to have my own language with it so I could lead this group through. And in that 3-day water fast, what I learned is that the hard is temporary. So it comes, but if you sit with it, it will actually dissipate. And so I had this pattern of thought. The morning I left my home in the Palisades with the canyons around me on fire and black smoke over and traffic on Sunset Boulevard, I got to the bottom of Marquez Avenue and Sunset, and I had a choice if I was going to go right down towards the Highlands to get to PCH, for those of you that know LA, or if I was going to turn left to go in towards the village. And then my thought was I would go down Temescal to get in. I'm sitting at the stoplight, and all of a sudden I'm looking at the cross section, and I'm like, okay, nobody's going right. I should probably go right. But then my brain was like, yeah, but you're going to go down into the Highlands, and everybody's going to be pouring out of the Highlands, and the fire is heading towards the Highlands. So you may end up with a problem down there, even though everything in my LA traffic brain was like, don't go into traffic, go away from traffic. And so I sat there because I had a couple stoplights to go. I was talking to my husband on the phone. He's like, just go right, it's easier. But my fasting brain kicked in. And it was like, no, left looks hard. There's a lot of traffic, but I would be going away from the direction that the fire is going. So it will be a temporary hard. It will be a small traffic jam that's going to help me get out of the Palisades as quickly as possible. So I went left. Yeah. And if I had gone right, Jeff, I don't know if you saw the news, but all the palm trees in the Highlands caught on fire, and the palm fronds landed on cars. And that would have been me. And the only reason I went left was because I had had an experience the week before with knowing that going that hard could be temporary. And it allowed me to rely on a hard that I had the week before, which is exactly the point that you are stating.
Yeah. Wow. Well, boy, am I glad you went left. And a lot of other people are too. Well, and you used your neo-mammalian brain. You were able to access your locus of reason in a situation that would otherwise hijack a normal person's amygdala, right?
Yeah. Right.
but you had that training through fasting and through other techniques that you employ in your life, that you could find that space between stimulus and response, right? And
Yes.
take that agency and leverage this unbelievable hippocampus and prefrontal cortex to make a very difficult decision, knowing that, yeah, oftentimes short-term stress leads to long-term gain. And we
Right.
see that, of course, in our human physiology all the time, right?
Yeah.
You overload a bicep or something and you rip the
Yeah.
microfibers in a bicep, and then you have an immune response. So there's a short-term pain, but then what happens? Oh, well, the body then, summons these structural proteins, actin and myosin or whatever, and you give it enough rest and you eat enough protein, and guess what happens? It grows back bigger,
Grows
right? So
back.
that's
Yeah.
like,
It's a great
and the
example.
body is like riddled with those examples. I mean, just exercise, you have a short-term inflammatory response for a long-term anti-inflammatory response. And you can literally find 1,000 different mechanisms that function that way.
Yeah.
But it's not always the obvious thing. Sometimes it's actually you have to lean into the edge of that discomfort in order to get the real actual comfort that you're looking for long term.
Ooh, that's so good. So did you just cold plunge before you got on all these calls?
I mean, candidly, I did. I doubled down on my cold plunge routine, and I also doubled down on my cold plunge routine before I go to the dentist. That's a whole other thing, but it's similar,
It's a
right?
great idea.
Yeah. So yeah, I had to go into these conversations emotionally regulated, and just think about this in the course of your daily life. You don't often plan a stressful conversation the way I was. Sometimes it just happens at the dinner table, with Uncle Frank, or whatever.
Yeah.
He says
Yeah.
something offhanded, and you're like, ugh. But how are you going to respond in that moment? Are you going to be able to cultivate that space between stimulus and response
Yeah.
and have a more adaptive reaction to that? And this is what all these protocols help you do. So you walk in and you create a set and setting of safety and trust. And then really tip or hack number 2 is about listening.
Mm.
And it's about active listening. And the way I think of it is this way: listen to understand and not to respond.
Yeah. Yeah.
Listen to understand and not to respond.
Yeah.
And this is so difficult, Mindy, because if we really rigorously excavate how we have conversations, we're almost always formulating a rejoinder or a rebuttal in
Mm.
our heads while the other person is still talking. And that's not necessarily a bad instinct. We will do it over the course of this conversation many times
Yeah.
because we're just excited and there's an idea that pops in and we want to, dance in a conversation together. But when you're having a stressful, difficult conversation, I would really recommend being actively focused on listening to understand and not to respond. So the way to do that is just to literally receive all of the information, wait for that person, your partner, to stop talking, then allow for a space where you actually synthesize everything that they've said and then form your response or your rebuttal.